and gentlemen, welcome also from my side. I hope you enjoyed your stay at the conference here in Dortmund so far. And I would like to welcome you to my presentation about the Green Logistics project, which is part of the Cluster on Efficiency in Logistics, the German Effizienzcluster Logistik Ruhr. And the project aims to achieve for first time comparability of the environmental effects of logistics services. If you are interested in the presentation, after presenting it, you can provide me your business card, and I will be happy to provide you the presentation. The Green Logistics project is defined by two focuses. First, it's about the development of a method to improve transparency and comparability of ecological assessment of logistics services, which includes, in our understanding, all relevant aspects of logistic value chains, that is, transport, transshipment, and warehousing. Second, it is about identifying and realizing ecological improvements for logistics companies. We had a focus on goods transport and handling on road, and several case studies covered aspects of network optimization to increase payloads and to reduce empty trips via track and trace solutions or via new forms of cooperation. Also, alternative ways of transport were in our scope, so we had some case studies about modal shift, about alternative fuels and engines. All those methods and green levers that has been developed have been realized in close relation to our industry partners to ensure acceptance and dissemination. Our partners, or the consortium, is presented on the upper right side. And furthermore, there has been a review by a stakeholder group from partners of different industry sectors. The project is still ongoing until March next year, and right now we are finalizing all the results and outcomes. When we now look back to the roots of the project and the latest developments in the field of green logistics, we see many norms and standards exist in parallel, as Verena Erler already presented this morning. And many different tools and databases are available, which vary also in the results produced. Again, many initiatives and projects do basic research and developments to provide a standardized, widely accepted procedure. As a consequence, companies tend to be reserved with a clear position in external communication. We already know that many companies assess their processes ecologically, but only a few address the results to public because they're afraid to be criticized about the way how they do it. That is why the Green Logistics approach for sector guidance first identifies and classifies all relevant emission sources of logistics services. That is, let's say in our understanding, for transport activities, logistics sites, and also system-wide sources such as administration. Second, it defines in which way our environment is actually affected by logistics processes. On the one hand, in regard of greenhouse gases and global warming, but also in terms of local air pollution or water pollution. The requirements for the green logistics approach were, above all, it's important to have a method which leads to comparable results for comparable logistics services. As you will see later on in more detail, the Green Logistics project defined a two-step approach. Second, it's about the generation of meaningful results, and also applicability must be given for large and small companies. This entails, in our understanding, the assessment of company-owned processes, but also of subcontracted processes. With the use of real data, process data, you can be, or you should be, as close as possible to reality, but also to ensure companies an easy way to implement the method. We will use default values for certain issues. And finally, it's about the provision of a comprehensive set of default values and industry averages for transport, but also for logistics nodes. Especially regarding this point, we also communicate and do exchange with other sector-specific initiatives, such as Clean Cargo Working Group for Maritime Container Transportation. The procedure, how we started the project, you can see it on this picture, based upon the recommendation of our industry partners. We did some relevance analysis by means of detailed studies, model calculation and literature study. Within this analysis, we used also different ecological databases, mainly EcoInvent and Gabi. So in the end, we were able to decide whether certain process have or might have a general significance for the total emissions coming out of the logistics network. And within this process, it was not relevant whether we think or our partner think that data is generally available today within the companies, or if public databases already provide a full set of high valid values. All that resulted in the Green Logistics System definition, which you can download on our webpage, and you will see the results of the analysis we did within the project. Now I would like to shortly present the results of the system definition. We set the time frame for the assessment of a company, a logistics company, should be 1 year. And for transport operations, it is relevant to include all means of transport and legs, independent of aspects of ownership, to assess the direct and indirect emissions, as we know it already from the EN 16258 standard, but with an extension for ancillary services and emissions of leakages, which are right now excluded from the standard. For logistics nodes, we defined that we have to consider all transshipment centers and warehouses, again, independent from aspects of ownership. And it's important to assess all direct and indirect emissions coming from engines, from the material consumption. For example, we did a specific analysis on the emissions indirectly produced by the consumption of packaging materials, such as foil, which can have a high influence on the total level of emissions of the company. And last but not least, it is relevant to address the emissions of administration, of employee commuting, and business trips. In in order to achieve comparable results for comparable logistics services, not only a common understanding of scopes and processes included is important. In addition, we need a standardized procedure, which is illustrated on this slide. For a given company and a set of logistics services, first, a screening phase analyzes the general relevance and defines a further level of detail that should be implemented. This is done with the help of simple key figures, and our threshold rule is defined by 1%. If emissions are relevant for less than 1% of the total emissions, they can be, they are just defined as less relevant. And when we have a higher impact on the total level of emissions, we need more sophisticated approaches to assess emissions. This is step 2. Step 2 is also, or step 2 also entails a step of validation. So, in the event that after having done a more detailed assessment of the processes and the emission sources, that we have a major change within the, let's say, the peak or the level of emissions, it might be possible that we have a change on the total relevance of a single process. So again, an iterative processes where we consider again if a process is less relevant, that means just has an impact of less than 1% on the total system. After having assessed ecologically the logistics system, a standardized allocation method defines how shares of emission have to be allocated, for example, to single customers, to specific logistics services, geographical or organizational units. The last step then entails the result declaration on the basis of a standard blank form and an optional certification if desired. Now I would like to present those steps in more detail. In accordance to the GHG protocol, the project defines 3 logistics specific assessment approaches. Approach A is the most detailed one and is based on real company-specific values. This could be the fuel consumption of diesel of single trucks. Approach B then uses activity data and information on fleet composition and sophisticated databases such as the handbook on emission factors for road transportation. Approach C then is the simple approach based on industry averages. Nonetheless, green logistics only defines a minimum standard and allows high levels of details. That could be reasonable if we have specific objectives of the reporting company or there are requirements from stakeholders or shareholders which define that there has to be a more closer look on certain issues. Or it's just about the access to activity data. Now I'd like to explain the first step with the help or using a fictional example. Based on the general assessment framework, which has been defined within the system definition, a user needs to check the general relevance and perform a quick emission scan with a distinction between transport via company-owned vehicles and with the use of subcontractors. You see it in the chart in the middle that we have a distinction here between internal and external transportation. So within the example given, we have internal road transportation, we have external road transportation, we have transshipment centers, that are run by the company itself, and we have further general emissions produced by administration, employee commuting, or business trips. After having assessed those emissions with the simple approach C, the user has to sort the processes in order of relevance. And then the threshold rule can be applied. As already mentioned, it's about 1% influence on the total system, but we also define that only 5% in total may be excluded. That again, in regard to the background of comparable results. So within our example given, we see that the threshold rule applies for employee commuting and business trips, where we do not need any further sophisticated assessment. For reason of time and complexity, now I'd like to skip the presentation of step S2, which is mainly a long list of formulas and default values. And I would like to continue with the third step, the allocation model, which we developed within the project for logistics networks. And as you can see, it includes the emissions coming from general aspects such as administration, employee commuting, and business trips, but also emissions arising from logistics nodes and from transport services itself. This allocation model gains a central role for the comparison of different logistics service providers. Imagine a situation that a company uses two different parcel transport companies such as DHL or UPS, though the logistics service itself is comparable. Now it's about understanding the emission on parcel level, which company provides a more ecologically friendly way of transportation and goods handling. To keep it short, the allocation model is defined by 3 steps. First, it is important to allocate the calculation results to defined subsets. In the second step, we are able to distinguish the emissions between warehousing, transshipment, and freight transport. And the second step also entails a method how the emissions of those subsets should be allocated to defined logistics items. And then in the last step, with this full set of ecological key figures for the whole logistics network, we can perform a reasonable and transparent allocation to customers, for example. Finally, the values derived need to be communicated on the basis of a standard blank form, which is currently developed by TÜV Rheinland, our partner for the certification process, and with the help of industrial players that intend to be certificated later on. The general agreement is that the focus of the certification process is to testify the correct use of the green logistics method. It's not a management approach as we know it already from, for example, 14064 or from EMA's certification. It's an additional certification process just focusing on the correct use of the methodology described. And again, of course, to avoid unnecessary work, the certification processes will be embedded in existing environmental standards and criteria. For comparing different performances of different players. It is important to have a high level of company-specific data, which in our understanding is a scope, it's approach A and B. So we have defined that to be valid as of 2020, for gaining a certificate, a green logistics certificate, it is important to have at least a share of 80% of the emissions derived by approach A and B, and only 20% can be calculated on the basis of simple industry averages. The last point I would like to point out is that it's also part of our certification processes that we have a feedback iterative process that defines that we have to that the reporting company has to declare and communicate certain values which are used within our approach to improve continuously the industry averages. When we see that we have technology or technology improvements over the years, we also need to adjust the industry averages. With the last slide, I would like to highlight that all the work done and results achieved would have not been possible without the strong help and the involvement of our partners. For example, we investigated strongly on the electricity consumption at logistics nodes and derived key figures. But also the method itself has been proved in terms of applicability during the whole project phase. For example, right now we have a big validation project going on with Lufthansa Cargo, where we prove the applicability on international level. Now I would like to conclude my presentation. As you have seen, the green logistics method further develops already existing standards and approaches with a focus on emissions rising from transshipment centers and storage. We are convinced to have developed a complete yet pragmatic approach, but still further alignment is generally needed. That is why we are currently engaged in several initiatives, as Verena this morning explained already, or introduced today. We are involved within the GLAC, the Global Emissions Council, within the working group on warehouses and storage, and we also support the IWA process for ISO certification. We also are engaged within the Green Freight Europe initiative, where we do support within the advisory board. So, thanks for listening now, and for further information I would like to invite you to visit our webpage again, where you will find also further reading in English. Most documents have been published in German, but you will see also single ones in English, or you can just contact me or my colleagues personally. Thanks.